I'm going to begin my talk by talking about the absurdity of capitalist overproduction. Every year in the United States, more than 3 million people experience a period of homelessness. Nearly half of them children, according to a report by the National Law Center of Homelessness and Poverty. During the same period, as many as 18 million housing units stood vacant. Another 2 to 3 million homeowners lost their homes to foreclosure and repossession from 2008 to 2012. This trend in foreclosure is likely to continue in 2013, according to the New York Federal Reserve. The vacancy rates have gotten so bad that in selected metropolitan areas, the banks have decided to demolish perfectly good homes rather than trying to resell them. The situation is absurd. Homes sit vacant or are even destroyed while children sleep in shelters or in the streets. It does not end there. The housing crisis has wreaked havoc throughout the broader economy. When the housing bubble burst, the massive financial speculation built around the industry was revealed to all. Some of the largest and mightiest banks essentially collapsed, only to be revived by the taxpayer bailout, amounting trillions of dollars. There have been tens of thousands of layoffs in housing-related industries, construction, finance, and real estate. Banks worldwide have tightened their credit flows, especially to working-class families. As workers were hit by the crisis, consumer spending declined, and the downturn rippled through the other areas of the economy. Under capitalism, economic crises emerge not because society has produced too little, but because it has produced too much. How was it that the richest country in the world, employing an army of economists in think tanks, universities and government departments, found itself in an unspeakable economic downturn that threw millions out of work and onto the streets? Why did these financial geniuses and PhDs and MBAs did not see where the economy was headed and steer it in another direction? It is because capitalism is a system that operates with only one purpose: profits for individuals and corporations. The overarching logic determines how capitalist owners and their administrators act and think. It also creates inexplicable contradictions in the structure of the economy. In the search for ever higher profit margins, in competition with each other for greater market share, the capitalists produce far more of a given commodity than they can be sold for a rate of profit. The companies start to lower prices, hoping to sell the commodities they have produced, but there are no more buyers to be found. Investors pull out their capital, and the companies lay off workers and cut down operations in order to save the rate of profit. This wasteful phenomenon of overproduction occurs on a small scale all the time, leading to layoffs and factory shutdowns, but periodically it leads to generalized economic recession or depression. This is called the crisis of overproduction. This is what drove the housing crisis. How could the banks turn all the newly acquired capital into greater gains? They began to lower interest rates on mortgages, allowing more working-class families to purchase new homes on credit. This policy was in effect a huge cash advance to the construction and banking industries, with the working class shouldering the risk. Immediately, the construction industry began producing new homes and condominiums. Working class families were lured into purchasing homes at prices beyond what they could hope to pay with their failing wages. At the same time, capitalists began purchasing homes and then immediately flipping them, that is, reselling them at a higher price. Since the bank seems to be a constant source of cheap credit, the new houses became more lavish and more expensive. But the real estate speculators built and purchased new homes without concern for the real needs and means of the buyers. In mid-2006, housing prices began to fall. In the summer of 2007, it became clear that virtually the entire banking system had massively invested in the housing boom. Afraid they will not be getting back their money, they had let out, banks tightening up their credit, and the entire economy shook to the brink of disaster. Now millions of homes sit vacant in the United States, the most on record. The homes are too expensive for working class families, especially because credit is now harder to come by and is now even harder to sell existing homes. Residential construction ground to a halt, and industries related to construction materials were put in grave danger. Many real estate companies filed for bankruptcy, and thousands of workers lost their jobs. Despite the absurdity of this situation, it is hard to imagine a different outcome. The high rate of profit necessitated it. If one of the real estate companies had instead invested in affordable low-income housing, it would have lost all its investors to the competitors who promised higher rates of return. If one of the banks had shifted its money out of the housing market altogether, another bank would have taken its place. The economic crisis was not caused by the bad decision-making of families who were proud at every turn to buy into the American dream, nor is the simply the product of predatory lenders. Both of those explanations put the endless of work wrongdoing individuals. The scale of foreclosure phenomenon shows that comes from neither ignorance nor malice, but from the very structure of the economy. Only socialism guarantees the right of housing. Socialist states are able to avoid this irrational inefficiency throughout democratic economic planning. Under capitalism, each individual capitalist acts independently of one another with the goal of maximizing profit. Socialism replaces this anarchy and developing a central economic plan that guides production, distribution, investment, and so in consultation with the masses of people through grassroots assemblies and organizations such as unions, women, and students' federation. By eliminating the extreme redundancies of the capitalist system and without the burden of supporting an opulent lifestyles of a parasitic ruling class, socialist planned economy are able to create such an abundance of goods and services that the basic necessities of life can be guaranteed as fundamental rights. There is no such a thing as an eviction in Cuba, for instance. In 1960, 1 year after the revolution, the government instituted the Urban Reform Law, which aimed to transform tenants into owners and ended landlordism. Property taxes were also abolished. Housing was similarly a constitutional right in the Soviet Union, the first country in history to have a democratic planned economy. Before 1989, counter-revolution that restored capitalism, a home was a right, and rent was capped at 5% of the person's income. Countries seeking to emerge from underdevelopment and assert their national independence have also looked to socialist methods to deal with the issue of housing. The Venezuelan government, which is pro-socialist, but has not yet made a final break with capitalist proper relations, launched a program called the Grand Housing Mission Venezuela in April 2011. The goal is to produce 2 million homes in 7 years and distribute them at minimal prices to Venezuelans in need of dignified housing. Hugo Chavez said in his speech launching the Grand Housing Mission that the housing problem cannot be solved within the capitalist system. Here we are going to solve it with socialism and more socialism, he said. How the government in the United States radically cut housing subsidies. The wave of working class struggles demanding economic relief in the 1930s brought about sweeping social programs such as Social Security, unemployment insurance, and general assistance. The first housing created by the federal government was in 1937 under the Public Works Administration, when 21,000 units were built. In that same year, the United States Housing Authority was formed. Then in 1949, the Housing Act was passed, vastly by expanding the government's role in building and administering public housing and imposing limits on the rents that could be charged. Soon the real estate corporations and builders opposed government housing. arguing that the more and more supplies of homes would drive demand, and that the values of such properties and therefore profits drift down. They successfully forced a change in the US government policy, making housing subsidies only for the very poor. The Reagan era, a war on workers and the poor. Ronald Reagan's presidential victory in 1980 signaled a turning point when the long-standing programs supporting low-income workers and the poor were now on the chopping block. The government pursued a sweeping policy of enriching the super-rich with massive tax breaks and industrial and banking deregulation. Reagan greatly expanded the military buildup and had the gun in the last year of the center of his administration. One of the most drastic and damaging cuts the government made was in housing. In Reagan's first budget, funding of public housing and the Section 8 programs was slashed by half, down to $70 billion in 1982 fiscal year. In 1983, it plunged further to $8.7 billion. By the end of the Reagan first term, the number of homeless people suffering in the streets swallowed up to a shocking number of 600,000. By the end of the Reagan's second term in 1989, subsidized housing programs had been cut by 80% after accounting for inflation. Available public housing for seniors was reduced by 47%. The problem is not just Reagan. If one were to think those policies in which the rich get richer and the working class get poorer should be attributed only to Reagan, a review of the subsequent administration will quickly dispel that myth. From Bush to Clinton to Bush and to Obama, housing for low-income workers and the poor has received continuing cuts. The housing and homeless crisis is growing ever larger. An analysis by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities says that 8.5 million very low-income families in 2011 were experiencing worst-case housing needs, meaning that they had to pay more than half their income on rent and utilities or live in severely substandard housing, meanwhile receiving no housing assistance from the government. That is 43% increase for 2007. When people hand over such a huge chunk of their income to landlords, little is left for food, heating, healthcare, clothing, transportation, and other essentials. Yet congressional funding of low-income housing was cut 6% from 2010 to 2012. Ultimately, under capitalism, it is the banks, corporations, landlords, real estate companies, and their politicians that will always be able to push back important reforms to bolster their bottom line. The real answer is to eliminate both private property and the false idea that capitalism gives everyone opportunity to own a home. Thank you.